Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional with a deep understanding of artificial intelligence from Seattle, USA, Mr. Peter Swimm. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Peter is the founder of Toilville LLC, which is a multidisciplinary agency dedicated to transforming businesses into conversational AI powerhouses. So, Peter, my first question for you, your work spans open source enterprise SaaS and global commerce platforms. What first drew you to conversational interfaces long before they became mainstream?
I think my uh, involvement in tech, even back to my very earliest job when I was in high school, was around the intersection of people using computers and not computers being used to help people. And so coming from a people first background always made me super interested in like how do we improve the interfaces? How do
Mhm.
we make things more understandable and relatable to the needs of the common people? And conversational AI has always been like a place I found a lot of value in bringing that approach to.
Mhm. You have worked across startups, global enterprises, and open communities. Which phase of your journey most shaped your philosophy on building human centered AI?
I think my transition from early in career where I was a support person and helping startups grow, and then going through like the dips and valleys of startup life where all of a sudden I'm employee number three and there's only two employees left. And
Hmm.
so you were forced to wear many different hats.
Yeah.
And I think that has always been kind of like my kind of like oh, I'm suddenly the person who knows the most about this subject matter in this company. And even though I don't have the bona fides or the training, I'm the best person for the job. And so kind of learning while doing and like failing and pivoting fast was really a great catalyst, for expanding my uh, technical acumen and working on projects and also having more confidence in myself,
Hmm.
being able
Hmm.
to like, oh, you don't have to like have all these bona fides to do these things. You just have to listen and be exact and do things. So I think that is also a really exciting thing of the last 20 years of tech is,
Hmm.
things are not solidified yet. There's still room for people who have the gumption to like sneak through and work up through the system before it becomes, patronage system or whatever, like
Hmm.
in other industries.
Well said. Well said. And if you were advising your younger self at the start of your AI journey, what would you do differently and what would you protect at all costs?
Um, I definitely would like go back and kind of reassure junior me that a lot of the notions and suspicions I had that I would defer to people, especially in authority and above me because they're more senior,
Hmm.
I should listen myself more and listen to my heart because those things have really like stood the test of time of being relevant. The things I think of 20 years ago and now I think are pretty much the same. It's just I'm now able to like express them without fear of being shouted down or
Hmm.
put in my place and all that. And I think
Yeah.
that confidence is super useful, especially when you're dealing with new fields and new ventures where sometimes the loudest person gets their way,
Hmm.
but it takes many voices to do things. So that'd be
Hmm.
the one thing I kind of impress
Hmm.
on younger me and juniors who might be listening.
Well said. Let's now talk about your company, Toilville LLC. I love the name,
Thank you.
Toilville. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of toil that has gone into building the company. But
Yeah.
Peter, Toilwell positions itself as a multidisciplinary agency.
Mhm.
What does multidisciplinary mean in practice when building conversational AI for businesses?
So I find that a lot of times I get brought into projects that have been existent but
Mhm.
failing.
Mm.
And I think the reason why things fail is because it's the hammer and the nail scenario where,
Mm.
when technology comes to solve a problem, okay, we'll just throw more compute at it,
Mm.
or we'll do this and do that. But I find that if you have diverse people in the room who use to solve problems, like my head of product is a musician by day. This is
Mhm.
his night job, and so he knows how to create from his brain an idea and see it to execution. And that's why I value him as a product person because
Mm.
I think you need to have a different you need to understand how things are born and made and listen and be able to collaborate with people and all that.
Mm,
And so when we are multidisciplinary, like I have an artist who does my design, who does art freehand without a computer, and we scan it
mm,
in and do all that stuff. And I find it very useful and important to have people who just like pump the brakes and don't just like when you say we're building a boat, they just start building a boat without thinking what the boat is and what it
mm.
needs and why
Right.
should this boat be different. So
Yeah. Well said. Uh, Context, institutional knowledge, and human connection are central to your work.
mm.
Why are these often missing in enterprise AI deployments?
I think well, a lot of the problem with AI deployments is that they're built from the top down. And I think a lot of people at the top don't know how the work bubbles up to them. So they're automating the report structure and the end results without understanding the blood, sweat, and tears that factor into it.
Mm,
And so when you tell a machine to do it, it's not like ordering a cup of coffee from Starbucks. There's a whole artisanal process of how things happen. And
mm.
sometimes the knowledge that is required for that to happen is locked in someone's head, not in a database somewhere.
Yeah.
And so a lot of AI projects fail because one, not all the stakeholders are involved. So the person who knows the most, maybe, Cindy in accounting who has everything in a book
Mm,
and it doesn't get automated. And so I think a lot of that is also kind of like, I think a lot of my consulting contracts, we spend like a week or two just like embedded and learning how they work because I think like people who come in with a plan without
mm,
understanding the process is just kind of forcing their ideas on people.
mm, mm. And tell me, what is the biggest misconception business leaders have about conversational AI?
Um, that it's free work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when we talk about vibe coding and automation, it's like, well, the model can do it. It's like, it's not like hiring the best employee on the market.
Mm,
It's like, it's a hiring like a newborn baby. And you have the opportunity to fill its entire brain and knowledge with the information of your company, but it still doesn't know the context of how things does things. And so I really try to encourage executives to think about when they ask me, well, what's the ROI on this? This is very expensive. I'm like, well,
mm,
how much does work cost now? And they can't answer that question. They don't
mm,
know how to measure and track work already. So how
mm,
can they hope to automate with AI? So that's like the first misconception I think a
mm.
lot of leaders have about the process and the products.
Very interesting. But for my viewers and listeners, Peter, can you give me an example without any names of a misconception that you have helped to solve?
Um, yeah, like for example, like one time I worked with a call center operator, and the head of the call center came up to me, and this was March of the year, and he's like, May of this year, can we have 100% contactless contact center?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, well, what is your goal? Yes, you can make anyone talk to a computer only. That is a business decision with
Mm,
the risk and stuff that's involved. And so I said, well, let's take a minute and analyze what you have.
mm,
And their problem set was they had a call center of 200 people, and 200 people talk to 800 people a day each, and each phone call takes 3 minutes,
mm,
and every the first 2.5 minutes is verification.
mm,
You proving who you are and that you have the right to be discuss personal information and all that.
mm,
So instead of automating 100% of the contact center and doing like a pyramid job, like this
mm,
incredible moonshot, why don't we just automate the cheap stuff, which is the validation? So have the computer validate the person, and
mm,
now your phone call's 30 seconds or
mm,
45 seconds.
mm.
And so you multiply that times the 200 people times the 800 calls a day, and there's your ROI,
Yeah.
80% savings, because people are able to take uh, shorter, longer calls and spend more
Mm.
time with people.
Great response. Thank you. How do you help organizations move from isolated AI pilots to AI that is deeply embedded in their business model?
I think that is kind of the most interesting potential is that a lot of times organizations, the knowledge of the domain of the company is siloed, right?
Mm,
And it may be in a spreadsheet in one department and it may be in OneDrive in another department, and kind of unifying and expanding just the portfolio of a company's knowledge
mm,
is like a very rewarding project for a lot of people because they don't realize, oh, hey, we have 17 different specs templates. you know, and we
Mm,
have like 18 different processes for this, and we have 6 different processes for that. And maybe they need to be separate, but you need to understand why they need to be separate.
mm.
And that is just the first step of like, oh, we can, there's tons of things we can do to optimize things.
Yeah.
And AI can work out the seams and stuff very quickly, and we can play around and experiment very frequently
Mm,
versus the 6 to 7 months it takes to anything happen in an enterprise.
amazing. What role should conversational AI play in revenue generation and not just cost reduction?
Um, I think it is a very underappreciated retention metric.
Mhm,
It is like access, it's availability, and it's also part of like, I think it's a cost to be born,
mm,
just like paying for electricity and paying for people, and like you can reduce it at your peril. And you need to understand what the value is. It's like, okay, we're spending a lot on AA, we're spending $30 a seat for Copilot, whatever. We need to understand like what that $30 gets us. And so a lot of the stuff I tell my clients to do is make sure you have analytics in place to one A/B test the before state and the after state, because a lot of times you end up chasing like these KPIs that are just you figuring out how AI works or proving that the vendor's product is good or bad and has
mm,
nothing to do with your business plans and
mm,
nothing to do with learning more about your company.
Very interesting. Peter, you've worked on platforms like Microsoft Copilot Studio and LivePerson's Conversational Cloud. What lessons from building platforms now influence Toilville's client work?
Yeah, I would say like the biggest surprise to me is the importance of access to how things are made and best
Mhm,
practices.
mhm,
Like a lot of times, like especially in enterprise, I will make templates or documents and pseudocode that's how to, and then I find to my horror like 2 months later, it's in production code. And
mhm,
it's like, and it's
mhm.
being used by 500,000 people a day.
Yeah.
And it's just like, so everything you put out in the world should be treated as an artifact of utmost importance and quality, and people should understand why it's there and what it's doing. And so people are empowered by the things you learn, but
Mhm,
also have the freedom to experiment and take that knowledge farther than you thought.
mhm. Well said. How do natural language understanding and generative AI complement each other in production grade conversational systems?
Yeah, I found that especially generative AI is very much like take the soccer ball and run with it.
Hmm,
And so it goes back, if it misunderstands you or doesn't understand where you're at or where you're coming from, it will happily just burn compute figuring out a solution to a problem that it thinks it understands. And so the better applications of NLU and systemic knowledge, understanding the place of the where this wish is coming from, helps generative AI be less prone to hallucinations and be more efficient and use
mhm,
less compute to
hmm,
solve the problem.
hmm. Amazing. My next question is that how do you future-proof conversational AI solutions in a landscape that changes every 6 months or faster? And give me an example if you can.
Sure. Um, I honestly think that the future of AI solutions looks a lot like DNS.
Hmm,
Like when you have a website and it's a brand called you.com and it goes to IP whatever. That's how knowledge is. So
hmm,
in this year my company's calling uh, a big coffee a venti and a middle coffee a trente, and next year we change it. We should be able to flip that like
hmm,
DNS. And right now I think information is very slow, and like I'll audit companies and they'll say, oh, the president of the United States is Barack Obama, or the
hmm,
CEO of
hmm,
Microsoft is Steve Ballmer, and it's just like,
hmm,
how's this information just lying around for years, polluting the library? And I think
hmm,
getting to a better appreciation of like what we know and what we know is true and
hmm.
Veritas and organization is probably the best benefit of the AI explosions, that people really like getting serious
Yeah,
about their data warehousing
yeah,
and stuff.
yeah. Well said. You have spoken about democratizing AI. And I know everyone talks about this, OpenAI and everyone else. What does meaningful democratization look like for small businesses and community organizations?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is um, plurality on the result. So
Hmm.
when you talk to AI and it spits out an outcome, am I able to escalate to someone, or am I
Hmm.
able to correct information, or am I able to tell it to bias into ways I want to, is very important. And then the other thing is, the if AI is going to be the landlord of knowledge,
Hmm. Hmm.
they need to take on the responsibility of curation and veritas and being truthful and accurate. And, like when I go to google.com, there should be zero mistruths on the page and all that stuff. And they're not doing that.
Hmm.
It's, in fact, I think people, if you look at the polling, people have less faith in search results than ever before. And that really illustrates how they kind of failed in their mandate of doing this. And
Hmm.
so, I think that is something that AI has really a bad reputation for that people have to overcome if they want it to continue as a driving force in the industry.
Hmm. How important is community-driven innovation in the future of conversational AI?
I think it's super important, especially like I think, especially in big enterprises, it's so hard to get alignment on products that it's hard to undo the alignment once it's achieved. And so, it takes 2 years to get everyone on board and takes 3 years to get them off. And in the meantime, three or four different waves of ideas have passed through. And so you're always going to need like small, fast, agile teams kind of pushing the envelope and giving new ideas up into the system. And I think the challenge is how do we keep those people hydrated and employed and happy and vibrant and uh, get credit for their innovations and give them opportunities to be leaders themselves. I think that's the challenge there too.
Hmm. But don't you think when communities or multiple communities are innovating across the world,
Mm.
how do you synchronize all this innovation into one uh, meaningful, usable AI document?
well, well, that is such an interesting question too, because it's like really we need like a system that instead of algorithms based on, okay, everyone's talking about Elon Musk today, or everyone's talking about what Trump did or whatever. It's like, why don't we say, hey, 500 people here and 300 people here are working on a cure for cancer. If
Hmm.
only they knew each other had half of each other's puzzle, you
Correct.
know? And I think like if we had AI search systems that says, hey, there's people right now who are searching the same thing you are, and they have the solution, but they're looking for the problem that you have,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and we need to be a way to like connect and synchronize these people together.
Hmm. I have time for two more questions for you, Peter.
Sure.
What emerging trends in conversational AI excite you the most over the next few years?
Um, I'm really interested in the idea of like crossing modality boundaries, right?
Hmm.
So I get a text on my phone and I pick up my phone and I order a pizza and I cross these different, boundaries of doing things and the context travels to where I am because, I have a phone, I have a watch, I have a laptop, I'm talking to you. They should all be the same microphone into the same information source.
Hmm.
And being able to have that context, like, okay, I'm going to leave my office now and go hang out with my daughter and my wife, the work data swaps out for the life data, and so I can answer all the questions about the day and all that too. And I think having that kind of like work-life balance as a organizational structure of my digital twin is something that's really interesting to me, and being able to like, you know, have different rooms of the house of my brain to work on
Hmm.
different things.
Hmm.
So,
But do you see this happening in the near future, or is it still more
um,
a dream?
I think it's going to be hard to do with the current stack,
Hmm.
but we internally we do a lot of tooling that we work on, and I am very hopeful for a very close and near future of being able to use this technology and tooling. And the funny thing about it is like people already have the equipment to do it. If you have a computer that says it can run Copilot or Apple Intelligence or Samsung, whatever, uh, these devices are powerful enough to run personal grade AI. And so that's the
Hmm.
thing I think we're going to start seeing in the next couple of years. I suppose, enterprise grade AI is expensive and you need a lot of compute for it, but to manage your digital life, everyone has, the Xbox has enough power to do
Hmm.
it.
Hmm.
Every new
Yeah,
laptop that came out this year has power to do that.
very
So
interesting.
once people realize that in the tooling, I
Hmm.
think we're going to take another quantum leap forward in this stuff.
Fascinating. And my last question for you. If a business wants to start conversational It's conversational AI journey today. What are the first three strategic questions it should answer?
Yeah, yeah. Um, what do we do
Hmm.
for our living? What
Hmm.
is our company's bread and butter? What is the work that we do
Yeah.
every day that counts? What do I do? Who does the work?
Hmm.
What part do they play in each step of that journey? And then finally, what opportunities are we leaving on the table because we're so focused on the first two?
Hmm. Very
Because I think
interesting.
a lot because I think a lot of companies they go, okay, we're going to ship the big deliverable on June 5th and we got all hands on deck, and no one ever stopped to say, oh wait, there's a conference a week before where our competitor is going to announce a thing that makes it irrelevant,
Hmm.
or whatever happens. So like the one thing everyone talks about startup mindset, and really it's just, being aware of the trends of the world and what's going on, and not being engaged in some cost fallacy and say,
Hmm.
oh, you know what, we're 80% into something, and by the time it gets to market, it will be a waste of time. So we should just pivot now, and being able to embrace that kind of mindset. It's scary, but if you're data driven, you can make it safer.
Very interesting. And on that note, Peter, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been with you. We covered some very interesting ground on AI, conversational AI, some of the challenges the world and organizations are facing, and all the amazing work Toilville is doing. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.